Hello, everybody. Welcome to this incredible session that we're about to start. My name is Hugh Huff. I am a partner here at Rethink Marketing, Rethink Travel Marketing. And before I present you our next speaker, this is being sponsored by Borello Travel. So we would love to show you a short little film on Borello Travel. So thank you so much, Borello Travel and Tours. If anybody wants a copy of that presentation, it is available. I know sometimes virtually these presentations don't look too good, but I am so excited about this panel because we've all been talking about COVID-19. You know, like someone famous said, COVID, 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 COVID. So it's nice to have someone who actually knows what we're talking about. Susan Kerba is an accomplished risk and crisis communications consultant and trainer with years of experience serving some of the world's most foremost public health agencies, including the World Health Organization and the Center for Disease Control, CDC, which of course has been in the news a lot. Susan has led communications for the US CDC Pandemic Influenza Medical Care and Countermeasures Task Force during the 2014-2016 outbreaks of MERS and Ebola, and has addressed the EU Commission Directorate General for Health and Food Safety of the topic of risk communication. She's also worked in hospitalities, including working with a hotel, Villa Cimbrioni and Ravello in Italy. So I'm sure you're all going to have lots of questions for Suzanne. The good news is that this is a longer session, but she is going to leave plenty of room at the end for you to send your questions. Please make sure you address them in the Q&A section. Without further ado, join me in welcoming Suzanne from her home in Paris to talk about rest, relax, and reality, putting risk communication in the front seat. Susan, take it away.
Thank you. Thanks for that kind introduction. And I'm my head is swirling because I loved that video so much. I'm now ready to head off with Borello Travel to a beautiful destination. Thanks for inviting me to speak today. I think that as risk communicators in public health, we actually have a lot of the same things that we're thinking about in the travel community and in public health. So thanks for taking time to talk to us today. What can travel professionals learn from public health risk communications? I made a short list here about things that we can think about that we know.
Suzanne, I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you share your screen because we're not seeing your presentation?
Oh,
sorry about that.
Sorry about that. I thought I was sharing. So.
Yeah, you were before something happened, and thank you.
Are we there?
Yeah, but we can't see your presentation, so. Okay, you want me to, okay, let me see.
That's very strange.
Okay, why don't you stop sharing and then I'm going to see if I can share because I think I got your presentation. Sorry about that, guys.
Okay,
It's actually a gorgeous presentation.
you're kind. I wonder what's going on with it.
I don't know. It's okay. So let me see something. I'm going to share my screen and then I promise I will shut up. So share screen. Okie dokie. So can you all see my screen?
Yep.
Okie dokie, go for it. Okay, go for it, Suzanne. I'm sorry.
Okay, thanks,
And
Hugh.
it just-
Sorry for the technical difficulties.
No, and just tell me I will be your clicker.
Okay, thanks. Anyway, just super high level, what can travel professionals learn from public health risk communication? And what can public health learn from travel professionals? Because we all are in a whole new world with COVID, even though we have experience with some other respiratory pandemic illnesses, including pandemic influenzas, and also issues like Ebola and Zika and some of these viruses and illnesses that impact places that people love to visit. Anyway, just some high level points here. Anybody with a phone is a journalist. So your communications matter regardless of who you're talking to. And there's a difference between misinformation and disinformation. And whether you're in hospitality communications or public health risk communications, the difference is big. Misinformation means that you're not doing your job because there's incorrect information out there that has not been corrected. Disinformation is oftentimes when people have an alternative reality because they have their own agenda that they're trying to push. And risk communication is a science, so everything I'm telling you is backed by some solid research and people who care a lot and travel around trying to make the world a better place. Trust is everything, whether it's trust with the citizen journalist, trust with your employees, trust with your colleagues and clients. And finally, hot peppers cannot prevent or cure COVID. Hugh, can we move on? Thank you. Anyway, just so Hugh already introduced me in such a nice way, but this is me and some of the clients that I've worked with in the past. And I work in addition to working in global health agencies, I also do work as Hugh said, for private companies and agencies who are looking for risk or crisis communication plans to implement as part of their business strategy. So it's not what I do is not only limited to public health in the policy and organizational agency standpoint. So I'm here for business risk communications also. So thanks. If we can go to the next slide, Hugh. So what is risk communication? I think that we oftentimes think we know what it is, but we forget the part that it's a two-way exchange. With the guidance that we see issued from CDC, that is definitely part of risk communication, but the real part of risk communication is how people are responding to the information that's being shared. So if I'm speaking to Hugh, for example, we had an example of this just a moment ago, if I'm speaking and yet my slides are not appearing the way that I'm supposed to, even though I'm speaking and I'm communicating, there's something getting in the way of Hugh actually hearing me or being able to see what I want to show. So it's an exchange and you don't know what the other person is thinking until he tells you or she tells you, and he probably won't tell you unless you ask. Like if I say, can you hear me? Did you see my slide deck? Anyway, it's a two-way conversation, always, 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 whether it's your clients, your customers, everywhere you go. Next slide, please. Thanks. This is the very clinical little diagram that we use in training for WHO to talk about risk communication and community engagement. We'll talk a little bit about community engagement in a few minutes, but the guiding principles of risk communication are there. And in that diagram, you can see that trust is the center of everything. And when we watched with sadness, of course, in the US, as the CDC has been sort of sidelined in the COVID outbreak. And unfortunately, mixed messaging in the early days of the pandemic, and also since then, political interference has really impacted CDC's ability to serve as the public health voice of the country in a way that it has in the past. And the big problem is that the trust that's in the center of this planning and this planning diagram in a principle has been trashed essentially. And so we have a lot of work to do to re-engender that trust. And in doing that, it's the only way we can move forward. And you need quality risk communications to do that. And again, as I said earlier, trust, transparent and fast with first communication. That's really key, I think, in the business community, because you have a situation where there's so many unknowns and there are also so many citizen journalists with a cell phone that if there's something going on at your resort or with your agency or with one of your clients, and you're not the first one to either report it or share it with the media, you run the risk of someone else taking over that whole narrative and ultimately driving the conversation in a way that might not reflect well on you. And because trust and client trust, employee trust is the center of what you do in travel, right? The guest has to be happy, the guest has to be cared for, the needs of the guest are catered to, you're delivering a product that you're proud of, and that's really wonderful. So you've built this trust relationship with clients and your other colleagues. And so keeping this in mind, that the trust is in the center and being transparent and fast. If something goes on, do not wait for someone else to notify the media. Be first, fast, and accurate. And if you don't know the answer to something, you say, I don't know. I don't know. I'll get back to you when I have the answer. Being transparent is critical. No one expects you to know everything right off the bat, but if you pretend to know everything, you're setting yourself up for damaging the trust, and it's incredibly hard to rebuild. Finally, the involving and engaging those people who are affected by, we'll talk about COVID right now, who are affected by the prevention initiatives that you're applying, by some of the border issues and people's ability to be able to cross borders. The people who are involved and impacted by that are not only your guests and clients, but also your employees. And I'll talk in a few minutes about actually a cultural center that's integrating work with their employees into their prevention response with great success, because the employees feel ownership, they feel involved, they're not waiting for just things to be handed down to them, they're part of the conversation. Again, two-way risk communication. So the final point here is build national capacity and support national ownership. This is what we do in WHO with guiding principles. We are ultimately, for example, I went to East Africa and worked in a presentation in Kenya, and they introduced me, and then the minister from the health department, from the Ministry of Health, said, Suzanne, we want you to go back to Paris. So you need to teach us everything that you think we need to know so that you can go back to Paris and we can do it ourselves. So, and that's what I want to do in my work. I want to teach you how to be the best risk communicator that you can be, and to love risk communication and see the value of it. So that's why we're here. Move on, Hugh. Thank you. Because risk communication starts with risk, let's think about what people think of as risk. What is risk to people? For my son likes to go rock climbing and rappels off these crazy high mountains. And for him, his level of risk tolerance is much higher than mine. So here's this guy with these cardboard boxes on the back of his bicycle. He's probably done that many times. So he's not that concerned. He's doing it on his own. He's done it before. He's controlling his own balance. Somebody else isn't driving for him. So he's not as concerned. We don't see that right now with COVID, right? Everything is involuntary. So that amps up everyone's level of concern and fear. And so your risk communication is addressing those things that are on the right. And this is what people are thinking. And again, we're back to, this is all science-based. There's research to support this. Everyone who comes to your website or who thinks about planning a trip is thinking about what's in the right column, because COVID is pushing us into this more concerned area. We're not in familiar territory. There's a lot of mixed messaging about the treatment, the prevention. Is the vaccine going to be available? Is it going to be actually effective? And we've got some great data that just came out in the nice clinical trial results that sound really promising. But it's like It's like waiting for the fire department to come and in a burning house and staying inside the house and not doing anything to put the fire out because the fire department is coming. We can think of the vaccine in the same way. The vaccine is like the fire department. I mean, it's coming, but who knows when it's going to be there. And in the meantime, we're standing in the house and saying, we'll just wait for the vaccine. House is on fire. We're going to wait for the vaccine. We have to keep doing risk communication and keep reinforcing that we all have fatigue from COVID. I'm in lockdown here in Paris, and it's I can tell you, I can't leave the house without a little attestation, letting, if someone pulls me over, saying why I'm outside and what I'm doing. I can only be outside for an hour a day. My husband has a restaurant in Paris, which is closed down from this, but you know what? It's what has to happen to bring this thing under control. And so all of us who are making sacrifices like this to reduce the need for a vaccine, frankly, to reduce the spread of the disease, it's really the only way that it'll be controlled. The vaccine is definitely helpful, but we can't rely on it. And you as travel professionals know, the likelihood, the distribution of any vaccine that's effective is going to be a long time coming. And also the US former presidential administration made the decision not to participate in the community-wide efforts to develop a vaccine that's supported by WHO. So unfortunately, we're not in a great place. But the long and the short of it is, how people perceive risk is critical to how they respond and how you speak to them. So next slide, please, Hugh. So as I said just a few minutes ago, we're in this new reality now. And the perception of risk is perception equals reality here. So to try and make people feel comfortable with the amount of risk that they're trying to take, you need to have signage and information in your venue or in your communication with your colleagues and suppliers that reflect to your customers that you recognize this new reality. COVID is there sort of in the background, but it's there, and creating and maintaining trust. People are determining their risk. So if they see that you've got signage, if they see that your clients and vendors, suppliers are following, following guidance as it's given to them, and you're making an effort to do whatever you need to do with in terms of prevention, whether it's putting hand sanitizer out in a public place, putting tape along a floor to keep people a certain distance apart. These kinds of messages consistently applied help people manage their comfort level with the risk that they're facing. We're all in this new environment, and so people are still kind of figuring out what is my risk? If I go sit in a restaurant, am I at risk? If I have dinner with my grandmother, am I at risk? All of these things are in everyone's head all the time right now. So on the right-hand side of this slide is actually a poster that I did with a working group in Nigeria last year before COVID. And we were talking just about an unknown disease and the characteristics of it, and how do we communicate about an unknown disease, just because the unknown means there's a change, and people have a fear of change and a level of discomfort with change a lot of times. So again, we're back to telling the truth and building trust with people. And that's the entire conversation that we'll have today. So next slide, Hugh, please. Thanks. In 2015, I was at CDC when the Zika outbreak took place, and you probably remember, those of you who are working in different travel industries around the world, you know, Zika came along relatively quickly, and the side effects from Zika, particularly on pregnant women, were of course devastating. And some of the risk communication challenges around Zika revolved around uncertainty, but it also revolved around a low perception of risk. This was a new disease. I mean, it wasn't new, but it was new in the scope that we were seeing it in 2015. And so people, again, were in this unclear place. This is a new disease for me. I'm not pregnant. I'm not a baby. Why do I need to take preventive action? Why do I need to go this extra mile in terms of, dumping water out of pots in my yard, or taking other, wearing long sleeves, or taking other sort of anti-mosquito actions. So these were the challenges that we faced pretty much. The competing priorities, because of course there were other issues going on, there always are. And then this environment of uncertainty, because it was a new disease, so to speak, in a new place, hitting a population in a very visible and just devastating way. And yet at the same time, people were saying, am I really at risk? Particularly men were saying, am I really at risk? This Zika seems to be only impacting women and children. So this was again an environment where risk communicators came together and tried to figure out the best ways to address this, the best ways to address the concern that people had about whether or not they were at risk. We're seeing this again now with COVID also. It's going to keep going back there in the early days of COVID, where the conversation was all around elderly people. Only elderly people are at risk. Well, we know that's not true. But in the early days, we still know that they're at higher risk. That's true. At least the research is showing that. But does that mean everyone else is not at risk? No. And the same was true with Zika. Are pregnant women the high risk group? Absolutely, they are the highest risk group. But does that mean everyone else is off? No. Everyone has to pay attention, and particularly the partners of pregnant women needed to be involved in family planning, and even people who were going to vacation in areas where Zika were taking place were given very, very bold sexual guidance in terms of, you're going to go on this vacation, take all these extra precautionary steps because Zika can be spread in different ways, but of course always long sleeves, long pants, and mosquito repellent. So anyway, the point of this also is because some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with some of the fallout from the Zika outbreak was devastating to tourism in areas where it was really where there was a high infection rate, excuse me. But I'm showing you this also because I want you to see that every risk communication challenge is different. This is Zika, but the next slide is the slide for COVID. And we'll see that the difference, the challenges look a little different. So, thanks you. So we again, on the previous slide, we looked at Zika and we had a low perception of risk, particularly was one of the challenges. And so risk communications job at that point was to move people to the point where they were motivated to actually take action. That's different than where we are now, although with masks, we're seeing this now with mask fatigue. We have to move people to the point where they'll take action. So we all know that inconsistent messaging at the beginning of this outbreak caused a lot of problems. And rumors continue to cause a lot of problems. The WHO has taken really some strong steps in putting together a team of people specifically to address rumors about COVID. Also now they're going to have to add an adjunct to that because there are rumors already coming out about the vaccine. So again, this is fear and concern is driven by the unknown. And the only way to address the unknown is to be honest and open about what you know and what you don't know. So can we go to the next slide? Thanks you. So when people were objecting to the idea of wearing masks, some of the guys who work in HIV said, you need to talk to us if you want to try to convince people to wear something that they don't want to wear. And so this poster sort of went around reminding everyone that in terms of risk communication, the same exact framework is going to be used regardless of what you're wearing. We're getting you to wear a mask for COVID or urging you to wear a condom for HIV. These all take risk communication initiatives to ultimately push people into taking action. Next slide, please. Don't everyone run away, because I'm not going to talk about theory for very long, but I think it's important to think about theory, because if you apply it to your own self, you'll see that this is how you think too, even if you don't know that it's theory. So if we think about COVID, you're thinking to myself, am I really at risk of getting COVID? Every time you step outside, you're saying, am I really at risk? I don't know that many people who were sick. Then you think, well, I know some people maybe who had some symptoms or tested positive, but they didn't really, it wasn't that bad and they're fine. So then you're thinking that too. So then you're thinking, what's the benefit of me staying inside, not going to restaurants, closing my business? So you've got to be pushed to feel that the benefits are going to outweigh the barriers. So the perceived barriers, what's the downside? Well, right now the downside is pretty much lockdowns and inability to visit with families. And with the holidays coming, that's going to be really challenging. And so what's it going to take then to get you to take action to prevent the spread of disease? And part of it is also self-efficacy. Can I do this? If I take all these actions, is it going to make a difference? So next slide, please. You will look at those things applied to COVID. So you can quickly zoom through. I'm not going to read it to you again, but when you think about your decisions around the prevention activities that you take for COVID, you'll see that you think those things too, even if you don't apply them as a construct of perceived susceptibility. You think to yourself, my chances are low or high, right? Or, gee, this wearing a mask is a pain in the neck. I don't want to be bothered. So then you see something that's going to cue you to action. And ultimately, you're going to move to the place where you say, can I really do this? Is it going to make a difference? And hopefully you say yes, and you put on your mask. Next slide, please. When we're talking to clients and colleagues and even our family members, how you frame the message is important. And I'm going to give a couple of examples that we're seeing right now with COVID, but this is pretty much the gain frame and the loss frame. What are you going to gain if you follow the guidance that you have, if you follow the prevention guidance? What are you going to gain? You're going to hopefully prevent your family members from getting sick, protect older people in your family, prevent the spread of disease. The negative frame is you run the risk of causing illness or sickness or death even to someone that you love. And you also are making it so the disease keeps spreading, and therefore these onerous measures like lockdowns will keep going on. So how you frame your message when you're talking to clients, if a client calls you and says, is it safe for me to come? You frame your messages in a respectful way, again, with trust in the center and honesty and transparency all the way around. But you also, I know you also have to market your business and your product. And so how you frame the message is huge. And the effects that you get from framing it properly are worth every bit of investment in time and understanding of risk communication principles to actually get there. Next, please. Best practice for risk communications. We just talked about this high level, so I'm going to run through it. But the bottom line is the small italic print says what people are thinking when you create and maintain trust. What are they thinking about you in that moment? So they're thinking, create and maintain trust. You care about me. You know and address my concerns, and you're reliable. That's going to engender them to trust you, right? And by acknowledging uncertainty, by saying when someone asks you a question that you don't know the answer to and saying, I don't know, you're reinforcing that you're not making things up. You're not hiding anything. And this is what we'll see this right now. I hate to say this, but I know it's to be true. With the vaccine rollout going on, there's a lot of uncertainty. And so we're already dealing with the people who are vaccine hesitant to start with, whether it's a flu vaccine just for seasonal flu, or whether it's a measles vaccine for their children that they're hesitant about. We already have this implanted 50% of people who say that they won't do the COVID vaccine. And so from a risk communication standpoint, I'm in a place where I'm thinking, okay, what do I need to tell people to help them understand that vaccines are safe and effective? What does that need to look like? I can't say, oh, there's no chance at all that you won't have a side effect. I can't say that because it's simply not true. And anyone who does say that is immediately written off because everyone knows that's not true. But that doesn't stop people from saying, oh, no worries. You don't have to worry about a thing. No, my approach to this sort of level of uncertainty is to say, you know what? It's okay to ask. It's okay to ask because you care, because you understand. And I'm going to tell you if I know, and if I don't know, I'll tell you that too. I will couch my message in a way that will be supportive, but I'm not going to tell you I know something when I don't. And that's just bad business. And it's also just totally undermines your trust. Again, transparency and accuracy. If there's an error going on, you immediately correct it and don't say, oh, no one will notice that that happened, or no one will hear about it, and then not take proactive steps, you will really, really damage your relationships and your capacity for trust if that happens. So staying on top of these things, whether it's through monitoring of social media, your reputation management, these kinds of transparency issues are, they're everything really. And so again, self-efficacy, you don't want people to feel hopeless or feel as though they're a victim of their circumstances. Someone in your, we see this right now with unfortunately, the people who were on cruise ships. There have been some terrible examples of where people are testing positive, and the cruise industry has not always been very candid and open about what the possible risks are of being in that environment. And it's unfortunate because it's not helping them and it's not doing them any favors. And they could be building a lot of trust right now with the community and with the potential world of customers by being more transparent. Next, please. What about rumors? The rumors are everywhere, and I'm sure that you have heard them about COVID, that they started from this kind of animal, they started from this place, or there was some evil genius creating the virus in a laboratory. And rumors are like everything, they can only be defeated with the correct information. So 3 different basic types of rumors: what people are wishing, I've heard there's a cure, I've heard there's a treatment. People who are afraid will say something else, will identify something that causes fear within them. We see a lot of 5G networks cause COVID in risk communication activities in Africa, and actually in the Far East too. And then people are hostile if they think that someone's going to get the vaccine before them, either whether it's a community, whether it's a nation. And there is going to be right now, there's going to be conflict over who's getting the vaccine first. Vaccine is going to be being produced by a variety of different manufacturers and through different organizations. They've already allotted, like, for example, I know Philippines is already on board for 50 million doses in the first round of manufacturing. But the process and the cold storage chain to keep that vaccine at that temperature and get it out into the rural communities, we don't have a way of getting a vaccine that requires that level of refrigeration pretty much anywhere. These guys who were carrying around the vaccines that require refrigeration are usually carrying like a little cooler, because these things are heavy, they have to go a long way. And more than once, it's been heartbreaking that people have arrived, health promotion people have arrived in a community with vaccine, and the vaccine has been rendered less effective because the cold chain has been violated. So at any rate, I think we're going to see, unfortunately, an increase in hostility rumors around the vaccine. But I think we're also going to see hostility rumors around the continued lockdown. People are just tired of it. So anyway, it's important to think about a rumor in the sense that it's not always a bad thing. Rumors kind of help you keep a pulse on what people are saying and what people are thinking. And they're actually useful in terms of helping you determine what steps you might need to take to build trust or to share information with people who need it from you. Most rumors have a thread of truth in them. Like, for example, I'll show you at the end of my first slide, I said that hot peppers are not a cure or treatment for COVID-19. And WHO has actually a slide that I'll show you toward the end of the presentation that says, acknowledges that hot peppers are tasty, because you need to give somebody, and in your assessment of telling someone that they're wrong, you have to acknowledge that part of what they say that's correct. And so I can see why you might believe this. Yes, it's true, hot peppers are delicious, but they're not really a cure for COVID. So anyway, rumors aren't always bad, but they're important to know about. Thanks to you. Next, please. So the other thing to think about is, why do people share rumors? A lot of people use rumors for social currency. I'm in the know and you don't know. So you've got somebody who's maybe got a sense of power going on in terms of the information that they'd like to share. And some have an economic interest in sharing the rumor, whether it's to undermine a reputation of a competitor, whether it's to undermine the faith of a policy entity or an organization that's trying to provide support. They're always competing agendas that drive why people are sharing rumors. So again, keeping your ear on the ground as a business and as a professional is key to heading off rumors at the pass that can ultimately damage your long-term reputation. So next, please. I just said just a moment ago, it's not enough to deny the rumor. You couch your response in a supportive way. I can see why you might believe this rumor. However, and this is a good one, it's true that older people are at high risk of death from COVID, but younger people are also at risk. So that would be responding to the rumor that says the only people who have to worry about this are old people, which we know is not true, but which prevents a lot of people from taking preventive action or from seeking any help from people. And this is where we determine in risk communication, you have to identify what's the value of the message that you're giving, what's the most important thing. And a rumor that prevents people from taking preventive action is a rumor with a real danger of causing a lot of problems. So identify your rumors, respond to them, either I don't know or I do know, and honesty and transparency, it's everything. Thanks you. Next. Community engagement. I talked about this a little bit earlier about how it's really important to involve the people around you, whether it's your employees, your clients and colleagues, to engage them in whatever response efforts you're doing and engage them in understanding the risks that they face. A lot of times we will ride in, for example, we saw this in Ebola. Everyone probably remembers the photos from Ebola where the CDC people and WHO people came in looking like the Michelin man with the PPE attire on and showing up in these small villages where people just couldn't even process what they were seeing. They knew that people around them were dying. They knew that they were dying in a terrible and viscerally awful way. And yet all of a sudden these people came in saying, you can't bury your loved one in the way that you're used to burying them. You can't touch them. And they were dressed in these, in the personal protective equipment that's incredibly intimidating. They did not conduct community engagement before. They learned a huge lesson, the entire response process. Now you see community engagement is at the front. But the entire process of integrating the community and helping them understand in a way that to help them find a solution that actually works for them, that they can adapt and that they can embrace and that are culturally appropriate. One of the most difficult things with risk communication in Ebola were the helping with burial practices. There were a lot of very culturally sensitive issues around burial practices. Of course, we know that Ebola was spread through blood products and bodily fluids, and a lot of these these burial practices require a lot of contact. And so it takes a deft touch to how do we reach a place where we can support you in having safe burial for the people that you love in this awful, tragic situation. So this is this involving the community, whatever the community is critical. Next slide, please. For an example of community engagement, I want to quickly bring to your attention the Kusa Cave in Zanzibar. The owner of Kusa Cave said, okay, we're getting this instruction about this new disease, corona. This was in the early spring. And we know we need to be taking preventive steps. I need to get my employees on board. And so she sat down with them and said, okay, we've got these instructions from the Ministry of Health. What are we going to do? And she sat down, produced this chalkboard and said, what are we going to do? What do we want? And what are we going to do to get there? And so this chalkboard is the result of an employee meeting where the employees drove the meeting. The employees said, okay, we want everyone to be safe, and here's what it's going to take for us to get there. So it wasn't a matter of the management or the organization handing off a printout from the Ministry of Health and saying, okay, we have to do this. By having the employees essentially write the rules based on what was comfortable and socially acceptable for them, now she has a little army of guys who were dedicated and who were committed to these preventive actions because they own it. They took the responsibility to write it down. And I'm happy to say that they're doing great in Kusa Cave. And taking smaller groups that are more local from the Zanzibar area, that in the past they've typically had a lot more clients from Europe and North America. So I bring them to your attention only because I think it's a great example of risk communication and community engagement with your employees. So your community engagement is not always external, it also can be internal too. Next slide, please. And so I want to also mention here, Morocco Unplugged, Jalil Ben Labili runs very lovely, highly custom small tours. And in those tours, he oftentimes takes people into really rural, undiscovered areas, and he supports a group of women who belong to a co-op of women who produce argan oil and olive oil and some other local products. And typically, when he's having clients, he takes clients to the co-op. That's one of the stops that he makes. Well, now Morocco shut down early. Morocco's taken some really aggressive steps against COVID. And suddenly the co-ops don't have anyone coming to them. They don't have anyone to buy their wares. They don't maybe really understand why they're not really getting anyone to be there. And so Jalil then took it upon himself to reinforce the relationship that he has with those vendors and try and reproduce for them through newsletter, through Instagram, to his clients saying, you remember that oil? I'm going to set up a website for these, these women's cooperatives who were dying without the tourist trade. And the guy on the right-hand side, same thing. He's in the middle of nowhere making these tagines. And in actual fact, in this picture, this is a tagine that he made for my daughter when she got married. So Jalil has really gone the extra mile to support the people who have supported him, in the sense that who've provided his clients with extremely wonderful and joyful experiences, but who now are, as we all are, now are in a difficult situation because what put food on their table in a really profound way doesn't exist anymore. So Jalil is going the extra mile with those external providers. Kuza Cave went the extra mile with their internal people, with their employees, and Jalil is reaching out to the other groups that have historically taken care of him. So I want to reinforce that from a risk communication standpoint, that community engagement, talking to each other, hearing things. I mean, I dare say some of these women are so rural, they probably have absolutely no idea why suddenly everyone disappeared. They're so isolated from other culture that it's important. We're all in this together, and that's a risk communication message. Anyway, Jalil at Morocco Unplugged, I can't say enough wonderful things about him and his dedication to the people who are part of his touring group. So next slide, please. So in sum, you need to meet your audiences where they are, regardless of who those audiences are, whether it's your client, your employees, your vendors. And part of that is recognizing that how to speak to people. Like, for example, when you heard the first guidance about COVID and social distancing, you heard stay a meter and a half. Who knows how big that is? Particularly if you were a young person, a child, and trying to process all this information, and someone says, "Oh no, you have to stay 1.5 meters." Well, I thought this Australian company did a brilliant job of showing what is that, so that you don't have to sit there and calculate in your head what 1.5 meter is. You can know that it's one adult kangaroo, and then you have made a connection. And this is another point, that this is clever and this is fun, but it's also accurate and effective. So from a risk communication standpoint, you do not want all of your messaging to be gloom and doom and we're suffering from this and you've got to do all these onerous things and it's miserable. There are ways to make this positive. The first time I saw this sign about the kangaroo, I thought, oh, and now I promise you, I don't stand a meter and a half away from anyone without thinking, can I fit a kangaroo in there? So your messages like that don't need to be fearful. You put the gain frame around them. Here's what we have to gain by working together. So that's why we're all here. Next slide, please, Jim. So this is the key takeaway. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it's taken place. We think we've communicated. I think I've hit share screen properly. I think Hugh can hear me, but if it doesn't happen and we don't know that it's happened, we're not reaching our goals in terms of communication. Next slide, please. Now here's where you learn that hot peppers cannot prevent or cure COVID. WHO has a great set of these little, you can print them up as posters on their website. If you type WHO Mythbusters, you'll see a lot of clever ones, and they're really well done because you can see here, they said, hey, it's very tasty hot peppers. So you're not just dismissing what people believe of hot peppers, but you're kind of bringing them on board. Oh, you know what, you're right. Hot peppers are really delicious, but you know what? Here's the downside. So you haven't alienated that person straight away. And we're going to see this with the COVID vaccine too. When people say, I'm afraid, I'm nervous about it, there'll be plenty of approaches that will say, you're an idiot. You're not listening to the data it's telling you. And you know, that doesn't bring people on board. So your goal as a communicator around this very risky time is to have trust with the people who you're working with, regardless of in what capacity, and be honest and transparent and recognize that we're sharing a very interesting time in life. And we're also creating a path for people who come behind us in terms of how we build relationships and how we manage the communications with people. Thanks so much for listening to my talk. And I hope it's been somewhat useful and informative. And I'll be happy to take some questions now. Thank you.
Sure. First of all, Suzanne, thank you so much. I mean, I love the analogy of we're in a fire waiting for the fire department or the vaccine to come in. We have like 5 minutes, and I'm just going to give you some of the questions that we have. A couple of them are about the vaccine. We heard about Pfizer, you know, the good news about that. And then they want you to, you know, how do you put that good news in context for us? We're being told that the needy will receive a vaccine very soon, or anybody that wants it. What are your thoughts about that?
I think it's really important to manage expectations around this vaccine, because it's true that it's been it's excellent news that we're making progress with the vaccine, but I also think it's important to recognize and manage expectations, because the first people who are going to get that vaccine are going to be the frontline health workers. They're the highest risk group, and they're the first person who's going to get it. And from there, it'll be done by risk group. At least that's how it's typically done. And I'm sure the protocol in this situation is the same. But again, the vaccine is not the be all and end all. The vaccine is an important tool, and it's wonderful that we're making progress in that direction. But the vaccine is, so we have other things that need to be taking place to get the disease under control. So optimism, also read the fine print. You can say, hey, the vaccine is coming, but look at the cold chain supply. Look how it has to be stored. You know, we have a lot to learn. So. Okay.
As you know, you're speaking to a lot of travel professionals, and I guess a lot of them are wondering, how do they reassure their guests that their property or place is safe to go to? Should they be proactive, or, you know, because you're talking about being very transparent. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on that.
That's a great question, and it's an important one. Definitely being proactive, because you don't want your guests to wonder if you're on top of it. And the only way that you can demonstrate that you're on top of it is by being very open and honest about it. We are doing everything we can, and because you are doing everything you can. And if you're not doing everything you can, then you need to revisit your motivations, because it is too important at this point to not be open and honest about what's going on. And I think as someone who likes to travel and who was going to different places, I want to come into the place and see that the facility, or see that the venue is taking COVID-19 seriously. I want to see that jar of hand sanitizer. I want to see the signage. It doesn't have to be in your face and aggressive, but it has to be there as a subtle reminder of, we're taking this thing seriously. I think that's a key message for people who have venues and places to welcome guests, to do what you can to make the guests feel comfortable in the context of you being aware and you being proactive and you being on top of what's going on with COVID.
Okay, cool. Here's another one that's kind of interesting. It's about the vaccine. And the question is, we're assuming, and maybe this is not, that say Pfizer has a vaccine, once the first responders get vaccinated, Americans, we imagine, will be vaccinated. So what happens for an American that's been vaccinated, goes to a far off emerging destination that hasn't been vaccinated? How is that going to work? Where people there maybe haven't been vaccinated.
This is a question for an epidemiologist. But well, I can't even answer that at all, because I think that I don't. Do you mean like clinically, is that person safe if he's been vaccinated and then goes?
I guess that's what they mean. Is it safe? Is that person that's been vaccinated safe, or?
Well, I don't know. I can't really speak to that. But when you think about other kinds of vaccinations, even like a seasonal flu vaccine, definitely protects you to a certain extent from, from the flu. But I think we can't really step to the plate this early in the game with this new, with Pfizer's product without a little bit more understanding of the efficacy and how they're going to be able to distribute it and how it's going to get places. So yeah, I can't really answer that, but it's a good question.
Yes. I want to ask you, we have sort of time for one more, which I would love to ask you. I mean, you've worked in CDC. The CDC has been in the news so much. Dr. Fauci's become this household commodity. Tell us, how do you feel about your colleagues there? And do you wish you were at the CDC right now?
This is a good question too. You know what? It has really been one of the great honors of my life to work at CDC. I have never, and WHO too, but CDC is a special place in my heart because I'm an American and I worked at CDC and I see the quality of the work that they do. And I know, it gets me teary. I know how, there are so many dedicated public servants at CDC, and it has really, really broken my heart to see them be undermined and sidelined as part of this COVID response. And so many of my colleagues have dedicated their lives to pandemic preparedness, and now those skills are being wasted and not used in this environment. So yeah, Dr. Fauci is great, and I think he's really done well in terms of managing everyone's kind of communication. Telling people, for example, to drink disinfectant, and these are shocking things. But I also know Dr. Fauci from his work in HIV, because before I was at CDC, I was at Emory University working in an HIV laboratory with project sites in Rwanda and Zambia. And he was the HIV guy, so we all communicated with him. But our project was social behavioral prevention, and his product was more of the treatment prevention with medications and things like that. But a wonderful, honest, committed guy and committed public servant. He is representative of the best, and the people who work at CDC are the same. So yeah.
Wow. Well, Suzanne, I think you represent the same thing, the best of the best.
Thanks.
We are so grateful to have had you talk to us. Thank you so much. Good luck with the lockdown. And we may have some other questions coming in, and I promise I will forward them to Suzanne. So Suzanne, thank you so much, okay?
Thank you, it's my pleasure. Stay well.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, bye-bye.